Today we are getting a bit of a running start into July in terms of the topic. In July, we're going to be focusing on advocacy for nonprofit missions and funding. And we have a series of sessions that I'm really looking forward to and I think could be really valuable for all of us to be in conversation about. We'll be sending a more formal announcement with those specific titles and topics and registration information in the next day or so. But so you're aware, we'll be talking about things like creating online communities with students, online community with students. We're going to be continuing our conversation about the potential community-wide database of community volunteers, the tracking software that we talked about previously. There are a number of issues that we didn't get to in our previous conversation about that we want to pick up and move forward with. Also be talking about hosting an effective webinar, tracking impact in an online world, communicating value to funders in this new and different setting that we all find ourselves in. So again, trying to think about some tools that can be useful for everyone. Now, of course, again, we want these to be sessions that are responsive to your interests. So if you have anything else that you want to make sure that we have any recommendations about what else you want us to be talking about or anything related to those sessions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And more information about each of the events, including recordings and summaries, can be found on our website. I would also invite you again, just to invite others to join us and to come to whatever events will be most useful for you. I love the fact that we have such a varying group week to week, because that means that you're not feeling obligated to come when it's not something that's useful for you, because you all have plenty of other things to be doing right now. And also, I love the fact that people are taking advantage of the topics that we're posting, because again, we have a number of people who couldn't join us today who wanted to. So our topic this week, as I mentioned, we're getting kind of a running start into this idea of tools that can be used for a variety of purposes. And we're talking specifically about information technology today. And we're joined by Joe Buchanan. I'm grateful to have him here with us. He's in the middle in what he tells me is a Star Destroyer. I mistakenly said it was the Death Star at first. And we had a few minutes where he was helping me mend my ways and reconsider my life choices. But he's in a, now he's gone. Okay, he's back again. But Joe is the IT solutions consultant at the Center for Social Concerns, and then as well as with the first year advising at Notre Dame. He's been with the university for about 5 years now. As part of his work with the Center for Social Concerns, Joe's had some significant experience assisting community organizations and thinking through their use of information technology. And so we're grateful to have him here with us as kind of an expert consultants in the room, kind of an expert voice at least. And we encourage you to direct any questions that you might have to Joe, be them large or small, specific or general, with, of course, the caveat that while Joe knows a lot, he is not an expert in everything. But one of the things that he definitely can do is help direct us to good and useful resources. So we're a relatively small group this week. And so I don't know if our small group breakout sessions would be as effective.
We still have about 2 to 3 people per group, so we could do a breakout session for a short time.
Okay. Well, why don't we do that? Let's go ahead and so I've got a couple of questions just to start the conversation. I think one of the things we're really sensitive to the fact is that I don't think any of us in this room, in this space, other than Joe, are IT professionals of any kind, right? So you're not going to know in-depth details of your systems, probably. We're not expecting you to. So I think the first thing we want to do is just start some conversations about your experience that you've had, right? So I want you to think about the ways that you've been working and interacted with information technology, including the ways that it's been helpful, ways it's been frustrating, and then have Joe help us kind of start to unpack what that means in terms of decisions that need to be made. But so specifically, I wanted to ask you to consider these 2 questions in our small groups. First, how does your organization typically communicate, coordinate, and evaluate programs? Just kind of in general, just think about those typical practices. And then how has your organization used information technology to accomplish those goals, especially during the pandemic? Just kind of think about general practices. What's the role that information technology has played? And I didn't specify that in there, but I think it's implied to think about where has it been frustrating or helpful. Happy to have you back with us. I love those small conversations. I don't know what I was thinking when I said before that we might not do it this week. It's one of the best things every time. Um, so, I mean, as is the case, we always like to welcome you back and just kind of open up some time to continue on the conversations that you were having, or to share anything out that you think might be really useful. I will say, for example, I was in a room with Maria, and she was talking about, the challenges of. We started talking at the end a little bit just about the challenges of kind of documenting what's going on right now, and what kind of software or hardware tools you might need to be able to track what you're doing and track the influence of what you're doing to make sure that's communicated well. Since we're in a time when people might not be making the same assumptions about the quality or the impact of your work that they might otherwise be, thinking about how separate we all have to be. So I think, we'd really be curious just to hear what your thoughts are in terms of this moment and how technology has been a useful addition or a troublesome hindrance. Maria, you're muted if you're trying to talk to us.
Thank you. I must have done that automatically when I switched over. So we use Adobe Creative Cloud to work on a lot of things. So I've been collecting a lot of photos that people are sending to me, and I've had to create interesting backgrounds or change the lighting or things like that to be able to use them, because I'm not able to go out and take the photos myself, which has been interesting, and I thought it would be extra challenging at the beginning, but actually just relying on other people and their creative space, and that they're able to offer that, has been great. We have a photographer that is in the main office, and she's taken some pictures. Our art coordinator has taken some pictures as well and sent them our way, and then we're able to use those. One of our employment specialists, she's sent pictures our way of just visiting the houses and getting, I had talked about the pre-ETS program and how there are a lot of students that are still working in essential locations. And so she went around and took all of those pictures, and then we were able to make a video out of that. So it's really relying on other people, whereas before we would just go out and do it ourselves.
Joe, related to that, I think, it's great that Maria was able to have those other teammates and team members to be a part of that process and effort. Mm-hmm. What about someone who might needs to act a little more independently, someone who doesn't have the support of other folks? Are there some guidelines or suggestions about, taking photos or using Adobe products or other things? How can they think about how to do that and still create a high quality product?
I mean, I think that using the Adobe suite is always a great choice if it's in your budget and accessible. I know they opened it up in certain ways during this as well. But it can be expensive, so that certainly is a factor. And if you're using it or you've engaged in the training, it's very great at what it does and things, but that can also be a challenge, I think, to get started. Sometimes it's overwhelming. It's very, part of, I say there's a lot of software out there that part of what makes it great is that it can do so much, but part of what makes it a challenge to use is that it can do so much that you're not always sure like what you should be doing with it. And a lot of those Adobe products fall into that. But there are some, I don't have any good recommendations off the top of my head, but I imagine that there are things out there, and even some of the stuff, like if you were using Google Photos to process and collect things, and it has some of those automated tools that'll sometimes punch up the pictures and make them look, nicer, adjustments for them and things without having to get into a full photo editing suite and things like that. And there's, I mean, if it's a budget constraint, there's often like open source alternatives for a lot of those kind of things. So when you talk about photo art, there's the like GNU image manipulation program that they call GIMP, GIMP, and it's free to use and super powerful. But again, the learning curve it could be steep maybe sometimes. So depending on what else you need to do in there and stuff, you may be engaged in some training time. So GIMP, GIMP.
Another great platform is Canva. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but that's another one that we use a lot. And they have templates, but you can also tweak everything from color. You can pull in the colors that work with your business, which is great. And then they have all the fonts, and you can upload your own images. And so we use that a lot too. And there's a free program, but then there's also, I want to say it's $12.99 a month or something like that.
I want to add
the pro. Yeah.
I want to advocate for Canva. I think it's a really great tool, particularly because they have great free video editing as well, beyond just the posters and the stagnant capacity. They also have video editing, and it's super easy to navigate for just, starter entry level stuff, but it produces pretty quality.
Yeah, that's great.
For sure.
But yeah, a little bit I've done on Canva has been a great experience, so I think that's spot on.
And I've heard,
and then I think in terms of like how you're acquiring the images and stuff too, one of the interesting things that I saw recently among my group here on campus was them actually encouraging us as staff, like if you're doing stuff, you're in a meeting, you're doing whatever, take some pictures. We don't have any way to document or know what's going on, and we're not seeing each other. And so I think in a similar way to what Marie was describing, just that, we can take these quick pictures on our phone, share them someplace, send them to each other, and potentially turn that into something meaningful or useful as a marketing material, or just even as part of explaining what we've been up to lately. And they just sent out kind of some brief guidelines. I'm not quite remember the rule of thirds and think about your framing and try not to backlight people, and not things that'll make you a professional photographer, but like, hey, take just a half a second longer and don't send us an awful picture. A mediocre one will be fine. We can work with that. But, like if you can hit some minimum there, that'd be great. So that was kind of an interesting approach. I thought that someone, a group I'm in, took. So something to think about there that could help increase the input of potentially usable media, especially if you're not able to send the person who usually takes the pictures to whatever the thing is.
Yeah, we did we're doing a client highlight, but we're also doing an employee highlight. And with that employee highlight, I'm like, send me some pictures, like more than one. And sometimes I have to refer back and say, try this, try that. But in my initial email, I put all that information in there. Check out the lighting, try to take it outside in the shade, all of those kinds of tips. Sometimes it comes back blurry, and then you have to ask them to please take it again. So yeah, it's a lot of back and forth, but it's worth it in the end.
Great. Other thoughts? What else was talked about in your small group sessions? And if it's just how terrible computers are, feel free to share that too, right?
One of the things we talked about was the technology. I'm with Logan Center. The technology that we use for business purposes seems to be going along fine. We're able to get our billings in and get incident reports to the state and things of that nature. I wish we could figure out a way to use technology. Let me back up for a minute. We have 8 group homes and about 60 people that live in supported living sites. They've been sheltering in place, and they have no access to visitation from their families or guardians and so forth. And I happen to have guardianship just as a volunteer for an adult with Down syndrome. And I would love to figure out a way to get him connected to a Zoom account or something. But I was telling Emily, I bought the house at Keurig coffee maker for Christmas, And about a month later said, how's it going with the Keurig? And the staff said, we can't figure out how to work it. So, you know, if you have people that don't have much experience with technology and they're sheltering in place, it's just really frustrating. I wish I could figure out a way to get people connected. I don't have a good answer to that.
It would be great if somebody just developed, like, with screenshots and stuff like that, like the very basics of either Zoom or Google Hangouts or something for people like the group home leaders, so that they could, and maybe such a thing exists already, but that would be a great resource. I think it would also mirror the needs of the Forever Learning Center in some sense, to be able to provide like a guide to getting these things, because I don't know that we're going to be out of COVID-19 anytime soon, and providing that resource. I mean, even if you just start, and then, I mean, not you, like, I'm not saying trying to give anybody a new job, but like if such a resource was created and distributed, there might then be time for feedback to like tweak it and make it more user friendly. But with nothing, we don't know. So I think that would be really interesting. I know from a campus perspective, Dan, I would be really interested in having our students develop programming deliverable via Zoom to people who are sheltering in place, so that there's some entertainment or some education or just some community forming that's facilitated by a student, because our students are very technology savvy and creative and could lead a Zumba class or could lead like a cooking workshop or whatever. But again, there would need to be something on the house's side or the receiver end, so that they could access that content.
And I had two quick things. First, I have to agree with Deanne. I was in another group with an individual who has guardianship of someone in a group home, and she was talking about how she was trying to get the employees in the home to figure out how to get the church services on Zoom. And they were struggling to figure out the technology. So it's definitely an issue that we're seeing. The other thing that I didn't think about while we were in our small group that just came up is we are having some pushback from parents who are saying, we're tired of technology, and so we're not going to sign up, or we're not going to participate if this is what the experience is going to be. And so I guess I'm going to throw that out. Have others seen that? And then what are steps we can take to start to overcome that, to get people to realize this is our kind of new normal, at least for the near future. So
as we start that conversation, Amy, can I ask you just a quick follow-up question? Can you say more about maybe what you think those parents mean when they say they're sick of technology, right? Because that's a pretty wide statement. Is it video conferencing or just
they're just tired of technology
online?
In general. They're like, we've done this homeschool thing, we're done with it. Our kids are sitting in front of screens all day. You know, we have to work, we don't have time to sit with them. And especially the younger kids, even though they are tech savvy, they still need assistance doing certain things that we're asking them to do via technology. And so we've had parents say, if you are only going to do Girl Scouts in a virtual setting, we are not going to sign them up for the program. We want them to have face-to-face contact with individuals. We don't want them sitting in front of screens.
That's a tough one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else have
like
experience
I said,
like
this
that?
is kind of, you know, at least for the time being, this is our new normal, our new reality.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
With Imani, I'm Baye with Imani Unidad. One of the critical issues confronting us is, you know, the COVID-19, this reliance upon technology for Zoom and trying to do telehealth and so on and so forth, is how do we effectively get the data that we're data from these meetings into our system? How can we, what software will we be needing to pull this data into so we can effectively use it as we move forward? There's a lot of things coming out of these meetings and we're writing stuff down, but just trying to get it system oriented where, do we need to upgrade the software? Do we need different software? Because it's important for us in terms of lenders, in terms of moving forward with grants and so on and so forth, to be able to capture this information in these meetings and stuff. And we're just having a difficult time with that. So as we move forward, that's the help that we need from you all. If you have any ideas how we could improve upon this here, because it is mounting on us. We're losing valuable stuff. And I know people who, just like what was being said by Amy, some folks are getting tired of meeting in this way, but it is part of a new norm, and we're going to have to sustain it. And so how can we best get, how can we just tap into this data and make sure that we're capturing what we need?
Joe?
So when you say, are you thinking about participant data? So like who was in the meeting type information? Or is this more around the minutes of the meeting and the content that was discussed and like capturing action items and things like that?
I'm like, how do we automatically correlate the data? So when we're doing meetings such as this here on Zoom or whatever, we want to type in something to get it out of it. So if we're using a visual, okay, how can we capture this data that we had so many people on, people stayed for this amount of time in the meeting, stuff like that's relevant. Or we want to say during the month of, X amount of people from a certain particular demographic participating in these meetings, something along that line.
Okay. So Zoom offers a few methods for getting some of that kind of stuff. And I've been fringed to a little bit of it, so I may be somewhat vague here, and I apologize that I don't necessarily have the exact specifics on there. But I know for working with the first year advising group, they were doing a lot of informational sessions with the incoming class, and so they want them to sign up for the Zoom session that they're going to be at, and I think they were collecting just a little bit of information about the people, so they were actually using the Zoom registration function to sign people up. I'm not sure at what licensing level that comes into play, so there may be a factor there. But so they were using that. So you go to the page that Zoom was hosting, fill in the form, and then like, okay, yep, you're invited, you're going to register for this meeting. And then the meeting comes around and they'll sign in using that link that they've been given, and they're a registered, so you can set the Zoom up either way, whether only registered people can come in or not, and things. So there's that Zoom security piece there that also helps correlate who was in the meeting to what you collected about them maybe at the point that they registered. And then the Zoom backend also has some reporting. So if you have a meeting ID or the account that it was scheduled under goes into that area in the zoom.us interface, you can get the reporting on like how many people were in the meeting. And I think the stuff that I've seen generated by it was, people who were in the meeting longer than 10 or 15 minutes, and it counted that as total participation. I'm not clear exactly how detailed that is, if you can get the actual like names of who that list has, and whether you might be able to take that to something else to correlate with who they are. Because that'd be the challenge sometimes is, part of what makes Zoom easy to get to is that it can be somewhat anonymous depending on how open it is. So linking that back to the demographic data about who's in there may be challenging in certain ways. So I don't know that I have a super slick answer there, besides maybe being able to collect information about them using that registration piece at the beginning.
More specifically, I did kind of narrow the question down to Zoom, but organizationally,
sure.
As a small organization that does a lot of work in the community, and like I say, this work is coming from different angles, whether it be those individuals who are homeless, recently released from incarceration, those who are addicted, needing, addicted counseling, so on and so forth, and just our overall software needs, and these students, like Rebecca was saying, we need help in trying to ensure that the software that we're using is up to speed and adequate for what we're doing, so that we can correlate this data, not just specifically with Zoom, but just in general.
Yep. Sure. Yeah, I think that's one of the big challenges, like Dave and I were trying to discuss and figure out ideas around and things like that. I think some of it is going to revolve around, like how are your current IT needs met? So folks in my group, kind of had outside consultant people. And so depending on who you're relying on for that, maybe some of the answer in terms of, because I think I'm going to give you a non-answer in the sense that it's often going to be specific to the detail of what you're doing and what you're working with and stuff. And it's going to take someone spending some time to get familiar with that and helping document, okay, here's how I see the needs and here's what I recommend in terms of a solution. And that's something where, especially if you're using volunteers to do that kind of work, I would encourage an attitude of holding them accountable to documenting what their process and ideas were for. One of the things we kind of discussed was some things where I think that where we are technology-wise and the direction things are going, like anyone who's recommending you buy hardware to run software like internally in your organization, that's probably not a great choice. Things are moving much more to the what the nerds call software as a service. So the way that we just buy email, so you get your email from Gmail. You say, no, Google's running all of that hardware and software and stuff like that, and we're just going to a web page to consume the service from them. And in the old days, it used to be that, you had to have a email server stuck in the corner in a closet, and it had to be connected, and it had to have all these things. And it's getting to the point now where that's less the recommended approach a lot of places are taking, because it just gets you out of the business of having to maintain and upgrade that. Of course, you are going to pay a monthly fee often for these kind of software pieces, but it gets you away from that big expenditure on a piece of hardware that eventually is going to end up being useless in a few years, or at least less useful and degrading in that way. So that's a line of thinking I would encourage as you're approaching some of these problems. Is there something, do we have to install this somewhere, or is it all going to kind of run on the internet? And of course, I guess you also have to weigh your security concerns and things like that, and making sure that stuff is maybe reputable enough to trust your data to them, things like that. I don't know if you're working with medical things, the software out there will talk about whether it's HIPAA capable and things like that. I know one piece that I use with my campus partners, that's a tier that you buy into. Like if you're going to collect HIPAA data, you got to buy this one, because that's where we finally get secure enough to do it. And otherwise, maybe we're not as careful with it and things. So, and it's hard to know what kind of questions to ask and things like that. But that certainly, in my opinion, would be one of the first things to think about is do we really need to house this internally, or are we comfortable with what the level of data we would be entrusting to someone outside of us and things. And then, kind of stitching it all back together and finding things. I encourage, if you want to poke around with just a loose idea, some of this maybe could be worth a free trial in a software called Wrike. It's WRIKE. It's a project management software. And so what that enables is like team level working and things, and you can get in there And so you've got your tasks and you've got the subtasks that go with it, and you can track accountability and things like that. So I'm not, depending on the exact situation you're using it for, it may be versatile enough to adapt to a lot of things and could be a good step in terms of tracking some of what's going on and where your different projects are and things. And I think that there's a certain level of free usage, and then eventually, you get into paying for features and extra stuff like that. So in the chat there, it has features that are comparable to Trello. Trello is also a super good choice for kind of tracking things in that post-it note style, is how I often term it. And Reich steps it up in certain ways because it has a lot of that, like start date, due date tracking. It becomes more of a project management solution where you can get into some of the different like Gantt charting and sub dependencies and things like that, okay, we can't start this task until we finish this task, and this task has to be completed, and that you can kind of see big project timeline type things laid out really well. So I think Trello is a great tool as well, and a super good choice for working on a lot of that kind of stuff. And my experience with Slack has been very much that it's a nice communication tool and can help bring the groups together. I haven't gotten too much into some of the more project-y type things, and I think there are groups that use it super well. I tend to have an experience with it as another method of communication among your people and groups and things, and it can be good that way. I caution with any of those solutions, the key is always committing to keeping it up to date. I say it about Trello a lot because that's my experience with it, is that all Trello boards are under a gravitational pull towards irrelevance, and we have to keep pushing them back up and holding them in the air and keeping them up to date and holding the people who need to keep them up to date accountable in that way, because as soon as you turn your back on it for 2 weeks, when you turn back around, everything's out of date. It's going to take you so long to get it all updated and working again that it's just not worth it. And the whole thing is just crash down and you walk away, potentially. So that just a reminder that any of that kind of stuff is also a commitment among the team that's going to be working in it to take the time to update it and keep it relevant. That was a lot of words. I don't know how much that helps. Sorry, what?
I wanted to ask, what is your support looking like in terms of tech at the center? Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Like me, like what I do? Okay.
Our support as it has been, we've had people recommended to us from Ivy Tech. We've had some other individuals come in who's supposed to be knowledgeable and taking a look at our system. And so we're quickly emerging toward this hodgepodge of gadgetry and stuff. But in terms of meeting our specific needs, we're not really getting closer to that. We're just accumulating gadgetry and we're not really being able to get the bang for the buck. And as a small agency, that's not what we want to do. So we really, that's where we at. That's what we have. We don't have a particular individual who's overseeing this here or anything like that. We've been trusting those people who have knowledge about it to suggest and recommend particular individuals, but that is not really getting the job done as it stands.
Okay, so you need some really like individualized support.
We do.
All right, thanks.
Well, if I could jump in, I think you hit something that's super important for everybody, is that if you don't have your own in-house IT professionals and you're relying on volunteers or other people who've been referred to you, right, you wind up having a lot of different people coming in and making different recommendations, and like you said, it can wind up quickly being a hodgepodge of things. And we recognize that that's something that can happen for a lot of organizations. And so one of the things that Joe and I have been talking about, we want to, because we're running out of time here, and so I want to quickly say that when we hit 1 o'clock, again, boys, just if you got to go, you got to go. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. But if you'd like to stay, I think Joe's got some extra time and he'd be happy to continue these conversations after the recording ends and after we finish. But I will say one of the things we really want to do is to create some basic resources that can be used. And one of maybe the most important thing is some recommendations and some documents that you can use to better track what people are doing when they come into your organization and start making recommendations and telling you what to do, right? To require that they are keeping records of what they're doing and why they're doing it and where they got it, so that the next person who comes in can see, okay, well, that's what they did. How can I make sure that what I'm doing fits with that, and it's one cohesive thing that's helping you achieve your goals. And I will say just very quickly as well, and Joey, feel free to disagree with me on this, but I've found that, you know, it's fairly unusual that you need a specialized piece of software for something. Usually when we want to get something done, it can be done, it's about learning to better use what we already have. I mean, there are some things about, you know, graphic design and other things that you do need specialized software for, but in terms of data collection and analysis of the kind of things you were talking about, Baye, I mean, that's, of course, we didn't have a larger conversation about this to get more specific about it, but I mean, all the things you were talking about, it seems like it would be pretty easy to do through like Microsoft Excel, or just, you know, basic things that you could learn how to do. I mean, again, project management stuff, yeah, that might be a different story. But there's, I think, just say this to say, I think we underestimate sometimes the power of what seems like a simple program. So sometimes it's about getting a new piece of software, but a lot of times it's about better understanding just how to use what we already have. And so I just don't want people to walk away from this thinking, okay, well, I got to go out and buy a bunch of stuff, right? Because there's often solutions already within our grasp, and those are the kinds of conversations we want to help be a part of. Well, like I said, this is not meant to be a definitive solution for anything. This is a start of a conversation. I hope that what was shared today was a useful next step